Good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us tonight. It's good to see you all on this lovely summer Wednesday evening. We welcome our guest speaker tonight, Janice Francisco, who'll be talking about problem-solving strategies during uncertain times. And there are uncertain times right now. Janice is the founder of Bridgepoint Effect, an innovation and strategy consulting firm that helps teams win. I love that. It's just pretty clear cut, helps them win. Janice has an MC in creativity and change leadership and has I'm very interested in this, recently completed a global research study on why innovation stalls out. Janice speaks frequently and writes on how teams can enhance collaboration and improve innovation outcomes, something I'm sure which is near and dear to all of our Agile hearts. So it'd be great to learn a little more about your study as well, Janice. Now, before I hand over the mic to Janice, just a few points. Big thank you to our sponsors, Wrangle, Agile Alliance, and Squirrel North. We thank you all for helping us make this possible. We will put in the chat a link to a feedback. We really, it's really important for us to hear from you, what you would like to hear in upcoming talks, if there's anything different you would like from a talk, but specifically any topics. If you can be specific, it's really helpful if there's anything really specific you're interested in. In the next day or two, we will post this event, this recording onto YouTube. Noelle will let you know through the meetup when it's available, and most likely LinkedIn. So if you could fill out that feedback, that would be wonderful. Noelle will do. Okay, so the talk will be about 15 minutes. Janice's talk will be about 15 minutes. And then we're going to open up to your questions. Previously in our talks, we've asked you to put questions in the chat and we read them out, where we're changing that now and we're opening up to each and everyone who can ask questions. So we're ready to go, Janice. It's all yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I was really delighted to see that we were able to bring this together. I've been to a couple of the in-person meetings and really enjoyed them. And it was nice to see that this community was still finding ways to connect and learn from each other. So thank you very much for the invitation. I think if we all look at some of the events that have occurred over the last few months, I think we could all agree that COVID has been somewhat of a game changer for us as individuals as well as the organizations that we're living in. And I think that we're all experiencing a much more heightened awareness around the concepts of things feel uncertain. There's certainly lots of change impacts that we're dealing with. And many of the people that I'm talking to say that they're feeling a bit of a sense of loss of control and concern around how are they going to navigate all of this change. Now, I think there's a reality that we are all starting to realize, and that is that we really are living in a VUCA world. And if you're not familiar with that terminology, it stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And in the past, we may have, quite frankly, been having just as much uncertainty as we have in today. But I think what many of us are finding is that we can't ignore the uncertainty because we're seeing it come at us from many more places. So we're finding that we're dealing with new kinds of challenges and problems, not just at work, but also at home, as we've all had to navigate through some of the things that we've had to deal with. And I think what we're finding about this is that these are the kinds of problems where there aren't always easy answers. And the ways that we've relied on solving problems before aren't really working. And one of the things that we kind of joke about here in our own company, and we see it happen often, it's our first instinct when we don't know something is to go Google it. Well, these are things that we can't find answers for necessarily in Google. And I think if we look at this, we could say that there's a problem with how we solve problems. And we've been cultured as a group, typically in the schooling that we have, to find a problem. When we see a problem, we go to find an immediate solution. And we want to get that closed off and wrapped up fairly quickly. But when we're dealing with these sort of more challenging problems, and we maybe feel that we're dealing with more of a crisis mode, we find that there's a little bit more impetus to get that done even quicker. And so we have also been cultured to be critical thinkers. We're taught and actually rewarded for finding one right answer. And in those VUCA situations, we really can't be looking for one right answer. They need a very different approach to problem solving, and we need to be exploring many answers. So I think the opportunity in these sorts of situations is for us to learn to think differently, to overcome the natural tendency we have for what I call premature closure, where we try to shut that problem down very quickly. And we need to learn to become okay with living with the messiness of working through solving these types of problems in these sorts of new realities. So my plan for today is to just share with you a little bit of the experience that I have around dealing with these VUCA situations and some of the problem solving strategies that we've found quite helpful when people are facing those uncertain and changing times. This is short, sweet, and I'm hoping to have you find that it's quite immediately applicable and something that you can actually find some tidbits and things that will be helpful for you right away. So I want you to think for a moment of a time when you were facing a change with an uncertain outcome. Think for a moment about what is it that you did when you didn't know what to do. I found that while we might have a sense of what it is we need to do, the issue is more about how do we go about it. In the work that I've done, I've worked with over 500 teams who were in this exact situation, and I've put more than 10 years of research into figuring this out. This is the sort of thing that isn't going to be going away. And one of the most interesting things that I found is that it's really helpful to navigate VUCA by thinking of these situations as moving through an innovation process. And innovation itself is very much a process of figuring things out as we go. It takes a very different approach to what we might be used to, or the certainty that we prefer to have when we're moving in new directions. And when we don't have the luxury of relying on a history or sure data or detailed instructions on what it is we need to do, we need to change how we go about doing that work. And what we need is a much more deliberately creative process where we can trust it to guide our thinking. And we also need to know how to manage ourselves through that VUCA process. So what I want to do now is just kind of walk through 4 things, or a couple of things you can do related to managing yourself through VUCA. So how do you take care of yourself through that process? If you're dealing with volatility, it's really important to have a clear goal that you can focus on so that you can stay on purpose. In volatile situations, it's very easy for people to get thrown off course. So we need to find something to tether ourselves to and something that we can feel comfortable enough moving towards. And you could do that by as simply as saying, it would be great if, and filling in the blanks, or if you're in an organization where they have some sort of a main purpose that they serve in the market, just finding a way to connect to that and the noble cause in that can be really helpful. Next, when you're dealing with uncertainty, it's really important to avoid making long-term plans. Make shorter plans and do things that will allow you to keep moving forward towards that goal. The focus here is to make sure you're taking small steps and finding quick wins that you can learn from. Now, I'm not talking about quick wins so you can go, hey, good, got that done. It's really more about the quick wins that are strategic so that they can move you forward in that goal. When you're dealing with complexity, I'd like you to remember this. Innovation is by no means logical. It is an emotional process too, which means that you need to be both strategic and holistic in your thinking. You need to find your way to clear through the fog. And one of the things that I suggest is that you find a way to tease out not just the facts and the data around what you're doing, at the same time, tease out the feelings and your hunches so that you can feel your way through with using analysis and intuition. At the end, we can put into a chat. I've got a couple of tools. I've developed them through the research that I have. If you're interested in taking a look at those, clearing through the fog and facts, feelings, and hunches, I'm more than happy to share those with you. It's the sort of thing that I've spent a lot of time at my kitchen table and also in our offices, thinking things through in that way when I've had to really get myself grounded and tease out those pieces. From an ambiguity standpoint, remember this: the only way to move through ambiguity is to keep checking for what you have learned. You need to constantly assess the what, so what, and now what in that situation so that you can find clues onto where to put your next best step. And it's the sort of thing that you can only figure out in an emergent way as things unfold. So let's look now at being deliberately creative. And what I'd like you to think about this is that being deliberately creative is about thinking in context, thinking in process, and being very clear on priorities. So let's take a look first at the context piece. And when we're navigating VUCA, from what I just described there, it's pretty clear that we need to be taking multiple perspectives, asking different questions, and looking at the world around us or what's going on around us as a system. So it's the concept of systems thinking, which is why relying on that critical thinking that we've learned to do so well isn't something that's going to necessarily work for us, certainly not in its own sense. We need to really draw on the more creative thinking, and we need to draw on what I call diagnostic thinking. I want to just explain something about making that, when we're taking a look at thinking process. When we are, I want you to imagine that on one side of the screen in front of you, you've got the word reactive. And on the opposite side, you've got the word creative. Now, when you take a look at those two words, you will notice that they are spelled with exactly the same letters, but they just come out representing something different and also having a very different outcome. Now, we are hardwired as human beings to kick into high gear of our fight, flight, freeze response and our survival instinct. When we are facing VUCA situations, when we find ourselves dealing with really uncomfortable things where there is uncertainty, that will kick in, and it's a fear response that we respond to. We are also creative, we also are hardwired for creativity. And we can make a choice to shift that natural operating system that we're hardwired for, and we can move into that other side. And so if you think of it as a polarity, the two of these are working with us in just the way that we operate on a regular basis. And it's a choice to move out of that survival type fight, flight, freeze response into the more creative and innovative thinking type response. And this is a process, we all have this universal process that's hardwired into us. We found out through research, and it's a process that takes us intuitively through clarifying challenges, generating, developing, and implementing ideas. And if we can make the choice to make that shift, it opens up a lot more for us. But one of the first things we need to do is we need to be very mindful of the fact that we're in that reactive mode, and we've got to find a way to get us over into that more creative side. When you're working or navigating VUCA, it's really important to have that awareness so that you can make that shift into that different operating system. So let me just talk a little bit more about what happens in that reactive versus creative system. So in that reactive mode, our whole modus operandi is around staying safe, avoiding risk, and think of it like this. If you had something coming at you, and this is from our hardwiring in the days where we had to worry about saber-toothed tigers and all kinds of other threats in our physical environment, we narrow our focus, we stop thinking, and we act to kind of close down and get rid of that threat. And so we don't like options here. We play for certainty. And so think of it as a very convergent response, very much like looking for one right answer. If I were to use that response to solving problems with a metaphor, the metaphor I would use is whack-a-mole, right? It's problem, whack, problem, whack. And so we're just very quickly trying to shut that down and get rid of the threat. Now, moving on that creative side, we're experiencing something really different. And that's the place where we're focusing on thriving. We're looking for opportunities. And in order to do that, we need to stay on purpose. And there's the connection to the VUCA aspect. And so in order to move out of that fear that's so natural, we need to have the awareness to ask ourselves, so what is it that I'm afraid of? And what do I need, or what does my team need to do to put ourselves into a position of power where we're more willing to take risks to create the future that we want? And this is a place where we're looking to find opportunities. We're acting to keep open to possibilities. It's very divergent in nature, where it's all about exploring questions, seeking alternative answers, and being okay with the ambiguity, and at the same time valuing the process of discovery, which is why the learning and looking for what's possible needs to come into play. Now, if I was to look at a metaphor to describe that, I'm kind of tossed up between the concept of a homing pigeon or a wayfinder. Think about it. A homing pigeon is very clear on where it's going to. It knows what the goal is. A wayfinder does also. But in the process of getting there, there's a lot of things they need to do to course correct. And they take feedback from the environment that they're in on a regular basis to make decisions on what's next. Let's take a look now at the whole concept of priorities. How do you focus on priorities? We do that through that diagnostic thinking piece. And when you look at the whole concept of that is a process of assessing what do we know, what don't we know, and what are we learning? And one of the most challenging things about navigating in a VUCA situation is the not knowing, because again, I think we're hardwired. We want to know for sure. We want to know that it's a sure bet. And it's very contrary to that need for us, which I think is why these sorts of things make us so much more uncomfortable. So one of the tricks that I've learned, and I coach the people that I work with to do, is I make a list of what I know and what I don't know and what I wish I knew. And then I step back and I ask myself, so what's important now? And the reality is that we only need to know enough to take our next step. It's very different than the way we get ourselves organized for making decisions and moving in that more certain type world, because we rely on having the data and the information first. But here, it's a matter of saying, I don't have all the information, but I do know what I need to be doing next. And this is what I'm going to be doing. And so it's about being willing to wait to find out the other things that we don't know. We need to trust in this sort of an environment that by teasing out what we know, don't know, and wish we did, but maybe we just need to let go of, that eventually it will unfold and we will find. It sounds a little funny, but I have certainly learned that there's only so much we need to do typically to move forward, and the rest we can learn as we go. And I think that's why it's really important to get into that habit of being able to step back, because if you are not stepping back and you're not taking that opportunity to see how things are unfolding, it becomes very difficult to manage that ambiguity and figure out what you need to be doing next. I just want to, I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to sum this up with 4 ways that you can gain control and find certainty in a VUCA world. And I'm going to say this. Think of stop, look, listen, and learn. And to kind of bring the 2 of those things that I was just talking about together, we need to make the choice to be creative. And we need to do that, or we can do that, by focusing on looking at how are we acting, where is it we want to be playing, taking a look at, do we feel stuck? And if we're feeling stuck, it's usually a very good clue that we need to reframe our thinking. And one of the more critical emotional skills that we need to pull on when we're operating in VUCA situations is the state of being mindful. Now, I'm not talking about mindfulness meditation. I'm not talking about going and sitting on a cushion and going, I'm talking about being fully present and open, curious, and aware of what's going on, not only inside of you, but also around you. And so that's the stop part. It's just, okay, what's happening here? The next part is to look. And we need to look at what's going on around us, or as we're looking at that, we need to connect to the context. We need to remember the goals and priorities that we have set. And the priorities may shift moment to moment as well as day to day. I've had days where, I think we were joking recently, where I think we had a day where we pivoted 18 times doing something, but we were very clear on where we were going in that process. And that allowed us, with having that vision and the ability to stay on purpose, it really helped us make decisions as we had to move and find our way. And then that's that place of understanding what we know and being curious and wondering about what we don't know, and focusing on what's relevant now and what can we let go, so that we have the ability to just be in that ambiguity and still have the confidence that we're moving forward and doing something that's productive and helping us get closer to those goals. The third one was listen. And in here, I'm saying we need to be listening to ourselves and we need to be listening to others. So when I talk about self, I am very much talking about the whole self. So what's going on in your head, but also what's going on in your heart, what's going on in your body, how are you feeling, what are the sorts of things that you need to be paying attention to so you can manage yourself through that process. And when we're talking about others, what's really interesting when we talk about a creative process, people often think that if we're doing something creative, it's an artistic thing and it's a solitary journey. And it's not. It's very cognitive and it's also emotional. And unless we're living on a deserted island, when we're being creative to solve problems, we are working with other people. And so we need to take, stakeholders, if we're in companies, or our families, or people we happen to be living with, into consideration as we're doing that. The tools that we said we can give you, clearing through the fog, facts, feelings, and hunches, definitely can help. And the last one was learn, and that's that constant assessing. And we basically say, take a step and stand back and assess. And so looking for what, so what, now what, so you can figure out what your next step is. And remember that it's very much an iterative and discovery-based process. And with that, I think I'm going to say we can open it up to questions now, Trish. And you know what, I think we forgot to say, we have a visual recorder here today who has been recording in graphic form what I've been talking about, and we can give that to all of you. Anybody who wants that will work through Trish to make sure that that becomes available. We should have that available tomorrow. So with that, Trish, what would you like to do at this point?
I think if anyone has a question, just you can jump in there and ask away.
I'm seeing a question there. Okay. Oh, so we're just waiting for them.
Yep.
I'm going to put the link for those tools into chat while we're waiting.
So if anyone has a question, don't forget to unmute yourself.
Or we won't hear you.
That's it.
I have a question, Janice. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed that. It's Tom. I'm, I guess, fortunate enough to be working in an enterprise in this interesting time. I'm finding that certainly at the bank that I'm at, there's even more risk aversion than normal about just about anything you can name. And I guess I just wanted to get your thoughts about that context and how people that are working in companies can kind of navigate that reality that there's just a much heightened sense of risk aversion seemingly across the board.
Yes, and that's natural. I think many of us are feeling threatened. If you look at what's happening in many organizations, I'm sure the leaders and different people on teams are very much concerned about can we continue to do what we had been planning to do, right? There's a challenge to what we think is supposed to be happening. And I think one of the first things to do is, I think people get muddled up in what really is happening. What I find when we start to unpack this, one of the things that's really good for people to understand is, well, what's really changing? What is at question here around what we need to be dealing with? And often what we think is the risk isn't necessarily the risk. But there's assumptions that people have, right? And they don't have the time to get together, or they don't take the time to get together to unpack what's happening. And so I think it's a matter of spending a bit of time to understand what that is, so that we can give ourselves some different options for doing it, right? There's what are the assumptions we're operating by? What is it that we really need to be doing? Well, how come we can't do that? Well, what are the conditions? And I think part of it also is to look at what are some of the criteria that we're using for decision making in the situations as they change. The way that we need to make decisions or the responses we're making may also need to change. And so unless we can figure out where those goalposts are, it becomes very difficult for us to make that shift. Is that helping, Tom?
Yeah, very much so. Thank you. There's a question here from Alvin in the chat. He asks, what are some tools to support the creativity you mentioned? I'm gonna bolt on my own question selfishly. You had mentioned before we got started a platform or a tool set that you were using to empower people in this kind of virtual whiteboard context. And so that's one specifically that I'm curious about, but if you could expand on that and kind of speak to a tool set in the context of that creativity.
Okay, so Alvin, could I ask a clarifying question? You asked about what sort of tools support the creativity. Are you talking about things to help you think? Just give me a little bit of a sense about what you mean there. Are you there?
Alvin,
otherwise, I'll need to make an assumption. So there is a number of things that we can use to support creativity. And one of the first things, you're an Agile community. And so one of the things that you are familiar with is relying on innovation, right? A lot of the reasons why Agile is done is to bring value to customers, to help support some of the changes in the innovation that you're doing. And one of the challenges is often people are doing creative things or trying to think creatively without understanding that they need to separate out their thinking. So one of the first tools is to learn how to separate out the thinking of generating options as well as evaluating them. So think of a brainstorming meeting. Everybody knows how to do brainstorming. But when we go to a brainstorming meeting without a clear challenge question, we're not sure then what we're generating ideas on. If we don't create safety in the environment so that we can bring that creativity to bear, it becomes terribly risky for somebody to offer up an idea because as soon as they offer up the idea, everybody squashes it, evaluates it, tells them why it won't work. We don't have enough money. We don't have enough time. We don't have whatever the issue is. And so one of the things you need to do is learn how to separate that out. And so that you become much more deliberate around, when am I using critical thinking versus when am I using creative thinking? So tools like that will help open up that conversation. There's lots of tools in the creative problem solving toolkit typically that you can look at. And I think, to your question, Tom, around risk, I think this is a time where we need to look more to tools that help us assess and understand risk, maybe beyond the ones that we typically use, so that we can bring some more of that more creative thinking into understanding what are the options here, what's really going on, how do we loosen up the thinking to look for where those opportunities might be. So I'm gonna leave it at that as a place to start. And we've got a question there from Milton. Thank you. It says, in work environments which can be emotionally charged, what is the best way of getting from reactive to creative? Is emotional intelligence a factor? I think that's a fantastic question. Yes, emotional intelligence is definitely a factor. And not everybody is emotionally intelligent. I think some of the things, though, I think a big thing is that mindfulness, being able to be mindful of where we're at. That's gonna draw the bridge to help us move out of that more reactive side into that more creative side, and using those sorts of using that kind of stop mechanism where we're paying much more attention to what's going on inside of us. Now, I've had situations where I've had to facilitate groups through some highly charged, very difficult situations. And what I find often, if we've got emotionally charged situations, there can often be a situation that people are passionate about what they're doing. They're vested. They've got an interest in making it happen. And I think we need to honor that. And many of the processes for facilitation go straight to the thinking. We operate only in that logical mode. And that's one of the reasons why I really like that facts, feelings, and hunches tool. I developed that with a partner of mine when we were doing quite a bit of research on how do we help people bring more of that emotional and that intuitive aspect into the problem solving they're doing. Because creative process is a very intuitive process, although you can make it very, very cognitive. You need to hook up those other aspects. So if you have a situation like that, you may find using that tool will help you or your team just move through that and separate out what are those emotions, what are some of the facts they're dealing with, and where are some of those places that they can get a little bit of leverage to calm that down. Does that help?
Mm-hmm. Janice, if people want more information, you have a website where people can go and get, I'm sure there's connections or links to, and readings and so on and so forth as well, yeah?
Yes. Our website is bridgepointeffect.com. So that's bridgepointeffect.com. And I'm popping the link there into chat. If anybody wants to download those holistic tools, we can get those to you right away. And then tomorrow, Patricia will have our fantastic drawing with some of the key points for you.
Excellent. Now, outside of what you have on your Bridgepoint Effects site, are there any other major readings or other areas, especially because there's so much talk about VUCA, and I went to Google just to learn more about it. So, and I know it's not kind of one specific, oh, here's a VUCA topic, but is there anything that you can recommend outside of, like I say, yourself, that would be good readings or good points of reference that we can use?
To help you get under that, kind of feel a little more comfortable about VUCA itself?
Yeah.
You know, Trish, that's a great Wow, that's a great question. I wish I had a book to offer
Yeah.
to send you to. We've got a blog that has, I don't know, 10, 11 different books related to creativity and innovation that have been developed by a number of people that we know and that we trust. And I think some of the stuff on that list in the blog would have maybe some places to learn a little bit more about how to tap that creative thinking and become more conscious of that. I can't offer you a book right now.
No, and it's funny because I did go to Google and I searched high and low and I thought, okay, I wouldn't mind getting into, but there is nothing in specific. I don't think it's that narrow of a topic. I think it's much bigger, right?
Yeah.
It's so encompassing.
Yeah, there's a lot to VUCA.
Yeah. There's another question here from Noah's. How to deal with situations when problem cannot be resolved? Situation we've no cure for.
As in, we don't have a vaccine or a cure for COVID? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
You know, we don't have one right now, and you know, I think here's what I think we need to keep in mind. I think there's a solution to pretty well every problem we have if we apply enough creativity to it and we understand the boundaries within which we can. But there are some problems that are not solvable. And those are likely problems where we're experiencing some level of a polarity around, should I do this or should I do that, right? And so so that's often a clue. If we have a situation where we're brought in to talk to a client and, you know, they keep going and coming back at the same problem, sometimes it's not, it's the way they're framing up the problem and what they're going after trying to solve. So I think the first thing is, if somebody came to me and said, it's unsolvable, we don't have it, I would first apply some of the creative problem-solving techniques we have to reframe and relook at the problem. What we find is that the presenting problem is never the real problem. Now, I think if you want to look at, you know, the thing you're talking about, hey, we don't have a cure for COVID. Well, I'm going to go out on a limb here and I'm going to ask, is it really curable or is it manageable? And so sometimes when we're going after the wrong thing, and I think there's a lot of fear around this, and naturally then it's kicking in people's response to want to be certain, right? This is an uncomfortable place for all of us to be in. And so people are looking for the certainty that if I take that one magic thing, this all goes away. And I don't think that's the way that life really works. And so I think we're going to find that this is a problem that needs to be solved in more than the way that they are, you know, that we're seeing in the media. It's going to be a problem that's solved in multiple ways. I don't know if that helps without getting too political and getting too much involved in opinion around all of this. But some things you just need to really look at. Am I solving the right problem? Or what is the opportunity here? And how do we navigate through it?
Okay. Well, we're at 6:42. I think people have asked the questions that they were keen to ask. And so, Trish, any parting words?
No, I just want to say thank you, Janice. That was very, very interesting. I learned a good few things tonight. Thank you.
Good. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah.
We'll chat tomorrow when we've got that image ready for everybody.
Yeah, that'll be great. Because we'll take that and we'll send it out with the video at the link with the video at the same time.
Perfect. Okay. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.